Okay, welcome to another time-lapse version of a full-length live stream that happened yesterday. And this one is where I finish off the fairly large 8.5 by 11 full-size piece of glossy cardstock scene. And this one's featuring the waterfalls and forest. And what I wanted to do with this one was, as I've done this composition before, probably 2 or 3 times, I wanted to do it in a little bit of a different format. I don't remember doing it as a nighttime scene before. I might have, but I just don't remember it. And I wanted to incorporate some light beams into it. And again, I've done that before, but I wanted to take this one a little bit darker, or maybe a lot darker than some previous versions. And this type of scenario right here really affords me the ability to go in and do a lot of the different types of things, the little detail types of things that I really like to do. And then I wanted to experiment on this version of it with some of the 3mm acrylic paint pens that I like to use. Okay, so what I'm doing right here is I'm doing a base layer coat of ink in creating shadows and toning. So I'm not just coloring, but I'm also defining light by the retention of the white paper that this scene is stamped on. Okay, now one of the things I was mentioning to the people watching the live stream is you can really take a lot of the time out of this portion of doing this. Now this is an 8.5 by 11, but this also goes for, standard quarter page, quarter size pieces of cardstock, standard card sizes, okay? But if you put just a few drops of re-inker fluid onto whatever applicator you're using, in this case I'm using just a little wadded up paper towel, it can really go a long ways. You can ink it up once, and it can pretty much take you through this entire scene as far as how much ink you're going to apply. Now what I do is I'm going into this piece, at least as far as this technique goes, okay, it's not something that you have to use on every scene, okay? For some reason, when people think of landscape stamping or Stampscapes, it's suddenly like technique oriented, where if you get like a rubber stamp that says happy birthday, people don't say, well, what paper and what ink do you have to use with it? That's no different than scenic stamping. You can do it in dye-based inks, colored pencils, chalks, pastels, whatever you want, watercolor paints or something like that. In this case right here, I'm using glossy cardstock, and I'm layering kind of in the spirit of like an oil painting tradition. I'm putting transparent layers on top of one another to kind of build up the transitioning values and color depth that dye-based inks are really great for, because they're transparent, okay? So what I'm doing right here, as you can see, I'm retaining some of those areas of light. Now in this case it's really easy, because I think whenever you do something like waterfalls, I believe that the waterfall should be light, because we're talking about very oxygenated water. It's churning in that, the current, and it's very reflective of light. And also when you leave your pathways, streets, rivers, etc., light like that, what you do is you create a visual path for the viewer to kind of wander into the scene. If you make the water too dark, it's not something that looks very reflective of any light, okay? A lot of people want to think that water is blue or something like that, so they color their water like a dark blue. Yeah, which could be the case if you're doing like a large body of water that's flat, like a lake or something like that, but usually there'd be some reflective areas in it, provided there's some source of light within the viewing area. Okay, in this case it'll be the moon. And that little kind of bizarre green orb right there up in the upper left is a post-it note that will be my moon when I remove it, because that's just kind of being used as a mask, okay? So I'm building up all these different tones in here. Now my water is a little anemic, but I'll show you what I do with that shortly, okay? So I'm just going a little bit darker with each color that I introduce into the piece. Now in a moonlit situation, you know, typically you wouldn't have too many different hues within the piece, you know, because it's moonlight. You don't have, you know, things like greens and browns and everything like that readily visible. I mean, you can do that if you want to, but you don't have to, and it'll look completely natural. So this is a fairly large scene, so just kind of keeping the color scheme fairly, I don't know, kind of monochromatic. It's just an easier way to do it. And like I said, it looks fairly dramatic and cool and kind of real nighttime oriented, okay? All right, so the darker you go, just remember to retain your lighter areas. I was mentioning to the viewers of the live stream that this is where a lot of times when people first start doing this, they retain lighter areas, but when they get into their darker tones, sometimes they eradicate all of their light and everything gets really dark, and it's like, oh my gosh, I lost my lighting in there, you know. So just remember to retain areas of light through your entire toning process, okay? Now this looks like I'm using the Prussian blue, which is a really, really dark blue. And I'm going into my rocks and kind of creating a strong vignette around on the perimeter of the card. All right. Now, I take my coloring further than what would look good if I were just to color, but what I do is I come into my pieces with some white pigment ink at the end, which is a really fun process when you can watch the transformation that takes place when you apply that. But so that being said, I use white ink, you know, to create kind of a misty look. So that being said, I don't have to be too careful about my placement of this color. I tend to go a little bit overboard because I'll be kind of toning all of it back with that white pigment ink to come, you know, in the kind of the last one or two steps usually, okay? So adding this down. Okay, now I'm going with the a little bit of a warm tone here. Usually in completely cool temperature scenes, I'll add a little bit of warmth, and I want to do it in a very faint fashion, okay? Because if I add it down there and I don't like it, it's no big deal. But if you add something kind of too dark too fast, you're kind of stuck with it, and then you'll have to kind of just blend it out or something like that. You'll have to do a little bit of repair work, but if you just start very, very light, it's just a really pale application of whatever, you know, color, value, or medium that you're working with. So just put a little bit and see if you like it. You know, you don't have to make some kind of gigantic commitment by using, you know, some media in its full force, okay? Just add a little bit and see if you like it, okay? All right, so adding black now, okay? The black is really going to add a lot of shading. Okay, now I'm going in with this alcohol pen, and it's kind of the same color as that antique linen, all right? And I'm just adding a little bit in there just to kind of warm things up a touch. Okay, so I think I was mentioning kind of adding some tone at the base of that rock to make it look more kind of rounded and three-dimensional. Don't color in everything uniformly. I'm going with the black, so I'm usually adding it at the base of things so that they look top lit. Okay, you see some of those rocks in there. It's darker in the shadows, and I'm leaving the top of it to be lighter. It doesn't have to be white, but just a lighter top side of it, which will be reflective of a top lit object reflecting the light coming from above. In this case, it'll be moonlight. Now see that shadow right in the center of this card? That's a little bit too dark, okay? But again, now see that wouldn't look really very good at all, but I'm going to be coming back into that with some white pigment ink, which will kind of diffuse that harsh, kind of dark shadow in there. And that's the same thing for all of this. Now, like I said, I'm going a little bit overboard on this one because I've done this scene before, so I wanted to, I don't know, kind of make it look different from those ones that I've done in years past. I don't know, I wanted it to be darker, and then also I wanted to use some shimmery, glittery, kind of reflective media in here. I don't know, I didn't really do a good job at that. I don't know, I should have went a little bit, I don't know, crazier with it or something like that, but I thought the entire scene was getting a little bit too textured in the end, so I kind of held back a little bit. Okay, putting some streaks into the water, little striations like that, but again, you want to kind of retain your light areas in there. You know, you want to have a kind of a strong dialogue between light source and reflected light within your pieces, and it really creates a nice kind of visual dialogue. Alright, so looking at my piece and kind of judging, you know, whether or not I need to take some areas darker or not. I wasn't sure. Now, I've been applying a lot of these dye-based inks, and all of them with a paper towel. Now, these alcohol pens are really great for doing detailed shading and whatnot, okay? Now you notice how I always kind of turn my card around. I turn it in a direction that's going to be the most conducive for the most comfortable application of media that you're doing. A lot of people, when they work on cards, they feel they have to keep everything upright all the time, okay? So they're moving their arm and shoulder around. But if you just spin your card around to whatever direction you're going to be applying something with, it's a lot more ergonomic, and you won't kind of suffer, you know, from, I don't know, joint soreness or shoulder soreness, elbow, all that type of thing, okay? So keep it in a direction that's the most conducive, again, for the mark that you are making, okay? Alright, going back in, and kind of, I don't know, this is like a medium tone blue. I'm going in and coloring some of those rocks that I just couldn't get with a, you know, a wadded up paper towel, you know, that's not good for kind of tight details or anything like that. And alcohol pens and dye-based inks are not, you know, soluble with each other, but for some reason when I go in with these alcohol pens, I guess there's a lot of surface ink that's been applied with the dye-based inks in some cases, so it almost seems like I'm removing some of that dye-based ink, which is kind of cool that you know, were able to do that. You know, because if some areas get too dark, you can kind of remove some of it, but don't count on it though. You know, it's, you know, these alcohol pens aren't like a blender pen for dye-based inks, but like I said, see, I'm removing some ink on the tops of some of those rocks in there, and it, I don't know, for some reason it's working. I just kind of discovered that recently, and I have no idea why that's doing that, but it looks pretty good. It makes some of those rocks look like they're kind of glowing in those darker areas, those darker regions. Maybe it's only the black that I'm able to remove. So see some of those rocks in the distance like that? Well, not distance, but in the darker areas like that, they are revealed again where I've covered them up with, you know, a lot of black ink. Okay, so adding some tone on the side of the tree. That's on the dark side, or let's see, let me see right here. This might be a little bit of a slight tan alcohol pen. I think it is. I'm just going for a little bit of warmth with this one. I mean, the scene looks okay as is, but it'll look a lot better when I add in the white pigment ink effect, the misty effect. And in here, I don't know, I probably go a little bit overboard with my 3mm paint pens that I utilize later, but yeah, it's one of those things. You always want to kind of push your, I don't know, knowledge base as you're doing things, okay? I mean, there's certain things, you know, that have to do with refinement and refining kind of the techniques that you already do, but it's always good to kind of push beyond those and to really kind of explore your different media. Go overboard sometime, okay? And I think I do that in some areas of this one. So I'm sacrificing this card in some ways in some areas with these pens right here. Like I said, I mean, using some of it was okay, but I probably go a little bit overboard. And then here's some glitter pens right here, too. The glitter pens look pretty cool in there for some effects, but I was trying to show it on the live stream, but I don't know. I don't think my camera was really picking it up too much, or it was just too small of a detail, so I didn't really use too much of that. But I really wanted to make this water area really shimmery down there. I don't know, maybe some stickles or something like that would be more effective, I don't know, than what I was using, which was much more subtle. You can see it up live, but, I don't know. I don't think people could see it in the live stream. Okay, so these are 3mm acrylic paint pens, and they're pretty big in terms of the pattern that they're creating, okay? And what I'm doing with these, because they are so bold, I'm utilizing them in areas that are roughly the same value, in terms of light and dark, as the color itself. So I'm just getting some extra texture from it, okay? I guess it's a little bit of lighting too, where I added in areas that are a little bit darker. It looks like illumination or reflected light, okay? Now these are going to look really strange, but it's because you have to use that same texture over a larger area. It's not just going to be some kind of illuminated highlights in one area and look natural. You have to use it in more areas like this. So see, this kind of, you're creating kind of a common texture throughout the piece. And it really stands out. 3mm is a very wide tip. I'm not sure what they call it. I think they call it a fine tip or something like that, but in relation to most pens out there, it would be really more considered like a bold tip pen. Not like a chisel tip or something like that, which is really huge, but pretty bold. Okay, now see, this one's a darker blue, so I'm using it in the darker areas to create this kind of, reflective light within the piece. And that's what I was going for. I wanted to create this kind of scenario where it looked like elements were really shimmery and other areas were really kind of glowing. It makes me think of glow-in-the-dark ink now that I think about it. I wonder if that would look cool on this type of scenario where we can I was thinking now, if I cut out like a glow-in-the-dark moon and put some glow-in-the-dark paints in that waterway and down at the base, maybe splatter paint, glow-in-the-dark ink down there at the base where I usually splatter paint just white paint. Maybe glow-in-the-dark would be pretty dynamic, I'm not sure. Other things, you do one thing and, I don't know, these other questions always pop up. One experiment answered, another 3 kind of questions arise, which is good. It's always kind of in the spirit of discovery to, to kind of have that, I don't know, whatever scenario. Okay, adding in some light beams. As I do more of these light beams, I get, I don't know. I think I get better at it because, like, this is a really light beam that I just added in, okay? I used to go with them always a lot more opaque and thicker. Maybe not opaque, but at least lighter. But now I'm kind of breaking it up a little bit. And I'm seeing kind of the value of doing that. So not just doing a solid band of, like, white across there. Now, on some of these, you can see I'm doing the beam in back of certain trees and in front of others too. But also kind of vary your beam. Don't make it the same strength from all the way across. Kind of break it up a little bit. Which means it's not harder to do that. It's easier because you don't have to do this uniform application of colors. Just kind of break it up a little bit. Have areas where the beam kind of stops and kind of starts up again. And that would be, you know, kind of more natural. You have certain things that are in front of the beam breaking it up, okay? You can have it certain strength in one area and have it weaker in another area where the beam is getting, like I said, broken up by things in its pathway, leaves or whatever. Now, if you lay some of it down and think, oh, I made it too light, or I didn't use enough ink and it's too dark, then just add more ink. You know, just it doesn't take any time. Just put the pieces of paper down again and add it back in there, okay? Right here, I'm just trying to kind of even things out a little bit. Maybe not even them out, but balance it out. You know, I have a couple beams, you know, going to the left as well as all of these ones going to the right. So I'm adding in another one here. I thought, we can use another one. So just kind of let your eye be the judge of it, okay? So see that those trees in the background, some of the beams are behind them, some of them are in front of them. And here's what I did on my last very large mountain scene. In the path of these beams, where there are objects in the path of that beam, what I do is I kind of strengthen the reflective light in the pathway of those beams. And I don't know if we would have that. It would mean that the beam is really close to that object, and, you know, maybe it's much, you know, more in the foreground than the object, but I think those reflective light features look really good. Okay, so Dr. Martin's Bleed Proof White on a toothbrush, splatter painting the base of the waterfalls to make them really look like they're, kind of misty and splashing and kind of in motion in many ways. Doesn't it look like it adds a lot of movement to those waterfalls like that, to have that kind of splash at the base of it? So it's just a really dynamic element to add into that space. I'm adding a little bit of a faint blue to those waterfalls in there. Okay, just so they're not so stark white, okay? I have a little bit of that kind of tan color in there as well, a little bit of warmth, just to make a little bit of a temperature change. Okay, now here's the glitter and pearl tone. See, as I'm kind of holding this up, I wanted to, you know, the viewers of the live stream to be able to see that reflective quality in there. But I don't think it was reading too much. Here I'm adding it into those rocks there in the foreground too. But I don't know. I could see it live, but it was very subtle. Okay, here's my white pigment ink touches right here. I don't know if you can call it touches, but because I use it, you know, kind of very prominently. But look at this right here. See how I'm adding this white pigment ink in the between those trees, but look how soft that light is now. And look at that light. Light becomes kind of this living character like this by adding this white pigment ink in those light areas. But look at that illumination. I mean, isn't it a gigantic extension of texture within this space? Now look at this. I'm using it at the base of this waterfall. Okay. Now, here's what I always say, but I don't know, people just do not do this. Maybe they didn't hear me say it or something. They just look at the end result or something. But if people kind of apply this white pigment ink the way that I preach, which is in a very, very dry brush approach, it'll be really easy to do. But almost 95% of people, I would say, that do this for the first time, and I totally get it, okay? They'll just put white pigment ink on a cotton ball like this, or whatever applicator they're using, and they're basically taking this sopping wet, super thick, almost paint-like ink onto their scene, and they're getting these big blobs of practically opaque applications. Okay, but think about it. What we're going for here is like a mist. So it's like a very airy application of it. So what you have to do is you really have to take a lot of that ink off of your applicator if you're using a brand new pad. And a lot of your pads out there are very juicy because we don't use white pigment ink very often in most, I don't know, card making, okay? Mine, I use it all the time, so mine is fairly dry, so I can just go right into that pad and take it right onto the scene like that. But I also I'm using a nice light touch whenever I apply it. But hey, I have to remember myself when I re-ink my white pad to, blot it off a little bit, or a lot, before I start applying it to my scene. So I totally get it. I'm like you guys. And you really want to apply in a very kind of methodical manner. If maybe it takes 20 taps for you to get what you want, but it's a very controlled application of that media as a result. Okay, so when you're first learning this, get the feel of it. So barely have any ink on your cotton ball. 100% cotton. The synthetic ones for me just don't work at all. It wicks moisture as opposed to absorbing moisture. All right, so see that right there? Look at that soft, illumination within this piece. I'm heat setting it right here because I want to emboss some overhanging tree limbs, foliage within this piece. And if I don't heat set this white pigment ink, my embossing powder is going to stick to all of that white. I happen to be using the Brilliance white, so that dried for me very quickly, okay? All right, so this is these leaves, overhanging tree, these leaves are being stamped in the VersaFine Clair. All right, now this is glossy cardstock, so VersaFine Clair is not going to dry on glossy cardstock because it is an oil-based, thick style of ink, okay? So you have to emboss it. Now you can do the VersaFine Clair on a semi-gloss or a matte for sure, no problem, because it'll absorb into those types of papers. But on glossy or non-porous surfaces like vellum and foils, you'll have to heat set it or emboss, in order for it to dry. So VersaFine Clair isn't for every surface, for every different, every application. All right, so this is ultrafine clear embossing powder. Getting some of that little straggler powder off of the surface here. Here we're going with the heat gun and embossing those overhanging tree limbs. It'll make them a three-dimensional element on the scene. And it's also kind of nice because it reflects some of the light as well. Okay, so we have some really nice dark three-dimensional objects like that. It doesn't look great with that glare on there like that, but I like it capturing some of the light. Okay. All right, now what you can do if you want to, like this one right here, that those leaves kind of that overhang that moon. I like them like that, but I'm going to put a little bit of light onto them with some additional white pigment ink like that, so it looks like they're kind of being illuminated by that really strong moonlight that's casting its light upon it. All right, so doing some final touches right here. White pigment ink does dry darker than what it looks like when it's been freshly applied. So as I was just talking with people and finishing off the scene with the embossing, a lot of my pigment ink started to set up. Brilliance ink is designed to dry on non-porous surfaces, and it's a fast drying ink, so you can kind of get the gist of what it's going to look like when it's dry fairly soon. Okay, so I'm just going back in there and doing a little bit of tweaks on here and adding a little bit of a lighter element here and there. I really like that kind of frosty look with that lighting coming directly below the moon, so I really illuminated that area of the waterfall. So you see all those textures in there. It looks pretty crazy when you look at it really close up, but when you look at it at standard, arm's distance, viewing distance, it all kind of mellows out a little bit and kind of blends in with the background. Okay, so anyways, I hope you enjoyed this scene and video. If you did like it, maybe press the like button and thanks as always for tuning into the channel.